Good day and welcome to Letters and Politics. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Today I'm very happy to welcome to this radio program Dr. Michio Kaku for a conversation about the future of quantum revolution in technology. Michio Kaku is a renowned theoretical physicist who is co-founder of what's known as string field theory. He has played a major role in popularizing science through countless television programs, books, and through radio, including through his radio program Explorations that has been heard throughout the Pacifica radio network for some time now. He's also an activist. He's been involved in such movements as the peace movement and the anti-nuclear movement and others. He is a professor of physics at the City University of New York, and he is the author of many books, including his latest that he joins us to talk about called Quantum Supremacy, How the Quantum Computer Revolution Will Change Everything. Michio Kaku, it is a great pleasure to welcome you back to this program.
Glad to be on the show.
Let's just talk about basics to begin with. What does quantum even mean?
Well, quantum is the language of the universe. When we look at computers, we call them digital computers. And why is that? Because they compute on zeros and ones, zeros and ones, zeros and ones. If you see a piece of computer software, what does it look like? A string of zeros and ones, zeros and ones. That's not the language of Mother Nature. Mother Nature talks in terms of electron waves. These waves, in turn, are governed by a theory called quantum mechanics, and that's what I do for a living. That is the reason why the universe is the way it is. Why can't we cure cancer or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's? Why can't we create fertilizer out of the air? Mother Nature can do all these things because Mother Nature speaks the language of the atom, the quantum. We don't. We have to learn from Mother Nature.
So this is string. This is also string theory. They're the same. Quantum mechanics and string theory go together.
That's right. We think that the source of all quantum mechanics is the string, and very briefly, we think that all the subatomic particles you see in nature, the electron, the proton, and so on and so forth, are nothing but musical notes on a vibrating string. So this would be like an electron. This would be a proton. This would be a quark. Different vibrations give you different notes, which give you different subatomic particles. So physics is nothing but the harmonies that you can create on vibrating strings. Chemistry is the melodies you can create by having these things interact with each other. The universe is a symphony of strings, and the mind of God that Albert Einstein wrote about for the last 30 years of his life, the mind of God is cosmic music resonating through hyperspace. That is the mind of God.
So let me see if I can wrap my head around this. If we think of digital, the way digital works is through a bunch of series of zeros and ones. Even this conversation we're having now over online and recording this on a computer, this is just a bunch of combinations of zeros and ones. You can also maybe think of it as on and offs. If we talk about using the atom, it's much more than just on or off or in a single direction. Is that a correct way of seeing it?
That's right. Think of an electron as a magnet, and it can be up or down in a magnetic field. It can spin like this, or the atom can spin like this. Only two ways, up or down, okay, for the atom. Now think of the atom spinning in all possible directions. How much more information, how much more powerful is it if the atom can be in all possible directions? The answer is infinite. There are infinitely more ways that you can vibrate an electron in all angles than just up and down, up and down. And that's the power of quantum computers. That is the language of the universe. The universe speaks that language, and we have to learn the language of Mother Nature if we're going to understand disease, aging, understand new chemicals, understand the aging process. All of this is done at the quantum level, which historically has been denied us because we got fixated on zeros and ones, zeros and ones.
So when we say quantum, we're really talking about the atom, how the atom moves.
That's right. And remember in high school, we learned that the atom has waves of electrons surrounding it. And these waves of electrons look like footballs. And these footballs in turn combine with other footballs to give you molecules. And so H2O, for example, here's the O, and the two H's give you an L shape, and that's what we call water. So that's the language of Mother Nature. Where are the zeros and ones? Nowhere to be seen. And that's why we have to go to quantum computers rather than digital computers. And this means eventually that Silicon Valley could become a rust belt. Silicon Valley could be a rust belt of obsolete technology like the abacus. We don't use the abacus anymore. It still works. The abacus works fine, but it's powerless compared to digital. Well, digital in turn is powerless compared to the quantum.
I mean, history would suggest at some point it will become a rust belt, right? I mean, this is what happens to most industries that emerge and become big, and eventually they die.
That's right. And that's why Silicon Valley, well, they're not fools. They're jumping in on the quantum bandwagon. There's a race now, a race between China and IBM, Google, and all the different other Silicon Valley companies to see who can market the first commercially viable quantum computer. It's a race. And the winner of that race could eventually determine the world economy. Just like the world economy today is based on digital, the world economy of the future will be quantum.
Before we get there, and we will get there, I just want to really hone down on this. And you'll forgive me for beating a dead horse here, but if we could just stick with the 0 and 1 digital example. And I know this isn't how it is, but maybe just to sort of see it in one's mind. I think most people understand this 0 and 1 somewhat abstractly. This idea of 0 and 1s create this digital world. If we were to compare it to quantum, it would be, rather than, as an example, 0 and 1, maybe 0 and -3, 0 and 10, 0 and infinity. It just moves in all these different directions.
Yeah, if you put it that way, the digital revolution, which is the basis of the world economy, is based on zeros and one, but nothing in between. You're not talking about 0.5, 0.7, 30%. No, just zeros and one. But Mother Nature doesn't do that. Mother Nature thinks in terms of waves, and these waves can in turn spin in all possible orientations, which means 0.5, 0.7. Now, how many fractions are there between 0 and 1? An infinite number of fractions between zeros and 1. So immediately, you see the power of quantum computers. Immediately, you see the fact that Mother Nature does not use zeros and ones, but a half, a third, a fourth, a fifth, all the numbers in between zeros and one. And that is the power of a quantum computer. Now, these exist. They're not science fiction. They already exist. And this is called quantum supremacy. Quantum supremacy is the point at which a quantum computer can exceed the power of a digital computer on certain well-defined tasks. That was attained 2 years ago. The Chinese and Google were able to create quantum computers that can compute on certain specific tasks numbers that were millions of times more complicated than an ordinary digital computer. The next step, the next big revolution, is to have an all-purpose quantum computer that can be programmed to calculate anything between zeros and one. We're not there yet, but there's a race, a multi-billion-dollar race between all the great powers to perfect the quantum computer, because that's the future. That's the language of Mother Nature.
What kind of tasks did it outperform digital computers?
Well, so far the tasks were rather mathematical, so they have no practical application in our real world. It was just to prove that on certain well-defined tasks, a quantum computer can outrace an ordinary digital computer by a factor of millions of times. That's been done. But some people say, well, what about something more practical like interest rates or the stock market or cancer or any of the other problems that face us scientifically and technologically? We're not there yet. We haven't yet applied it. However, one group that is very interested in this is the CIA. The CIA already has stated that, yes, this could be a national problem if quantum computers are developed that can crack any known digital code. Think about that. The crown jewels of any security agency, the nuclear codes, the banking codes could be cracked if someone has a quantum computer. And so this is not just a theoretical question. This is a practical question for the CIA, the KGB, and all the other intelligence agencies in the world. I spoke in Moscow a few years ago, and sure enough, yes, the Russians too are working on quantum computers. Make no mistake about that.
About cracking codes, could a quantum theory make its own code that would be enabled to crack?
Oh, well, codes are based on factorizing numbers. We know, for example, the 3 times 5 is 15, okay? So if I give you the number 15 and I ask you to factorize it, you would say that's 3 times 5. Now, a quantum computer did that, a few decades ago. Many people laughed and said, what? All this hype around 3 times 5 is 15. But remember, that was done on atoms. Atoms. Think about that. Think how difficult it is to manipulate individual atoms to do 3 times 5 is 15. Now, nobody is laughing anymore. They realize that, yes, quantum computers can crack digital codes, and one day may be able to crack any digital code, which means Bitcoin, which means, the crown jewels of any security agency, the nuclear codes, are up for grabs. So the CIA has taken a very sharp interest in quantum computing.
When I think of a digital computer, I think of a box with inside it is hardware, chips, microchips, physical things that do these calculations of zeros and ones. How do you harness an atom?
Well, first of all, the simplest quantum computer is a leaf. Think of what Mother Nature does. Mother Nature creates a leaf that takes sunlight, mixes it with carbon dioxide, and spins out oxygen and sugar. That is an amazing process. We cannot duplicate that process on the scale of the atom that Mother Nature worked out billions of years ago. And so you realize that in principle, these things don't have to be huge, bulky. Now, the ones that we build today are big and bulky. They look like a chandelier, a beautiful chandelier, but the actual computer is at the bottom of the chandelier. The chandelier is actually cooling pipes, miniature cooling pipes of liquid helium, let's say, to bring down the temperature near absolute zero. So you're not going to find one of these in your living room. Just like the first computers were the size of a warehouse, when the military was building regular digital computers during World War II, they were huge. It took a warehouse to house them. We're still at that stage where quantum computers are like a chandelier, huge, gigantic monstrosities, but we know that we can get it down to the size of a leaf, because that's what Mother Nature does. Mother Nature, all the wonders of the forest, the flowers, the trees, they all depend on photosynthesis, which in turn is a quantum process, and we still cannot duplicate that in the lab.
But photosynthesis is
still ahead of us.
But photosynthesis is something that they're studying and trying
to we want to create
understand.
Artificial photosynthesis. We want to tinker with it to create an alternative quantum photosynthesis, which is the work of many scientists today, because that process is very efficient. Mother Nature drives the life on Earth on the basis of photosynthesis. Our photosynthesis is crude and wasteful. We want to be as efficient and as neat as Mother Nature.
One day, could we look at a possibility, perhaps not in my lifetime, or maybe even in my lifetime, I'll let you answer that, where we would have quantum phones, where we could, you said in the size of a leaf, where we would all possess this kind of extremely powerful technology?
Well, I think once we start to have commercially available quantum computers, we'll interface with them via ordinary digital cell phones. And so, for example, maybe your wristwatch or your contact lens, maybe your contact lens will be interfacing with the cloud. In the cloud, you have these gigantic chandeliers, which are quantum computers, but they compute and they take commands from your contact lens. So you simply blink, and you access the world's entire database just by blinking. which means that in the future, we'll be able to decode people's languages. We'll be able to create works of art. We'll be able to solve quantum problems just by blinking and thinking about it.
Is the idea that we can describe nature through equations and how it does things? Is this replicating that?
That's right. We think that the language of the universe is the quantum theory. The quantum theory, in turn, is based on a wave equation. The wave equation was written first down in 1925 by Erwin Schrödinger, and all chemistry can be reduced to that equation. In other words, if you knew the location of all the electrons in your body, you could create a wave function of you, a wave function of your body, where the location of every single particle is mentioned in that equation. That's the power of this equation. Now, what do we use it for? Eventually, we're going to use it to crack problems like illnesses and diseases. They all operate at the molecular level. How do we find new drugs today? By trial and error. What we do is we get thousands of petri dishes, put a little bit of bacteria in each one, and then put a potential cure in each of these dishes by the thousands. And that's how we find the next wonder drug, by hit or miss. In the future, we'll be able to mimic the properties of these things in the memory of a computer. You'll just push a button. You'll push a button, and then the computer will solve the equations to see whether or not your wonder material can really destroy a germ. And so all medicine could be turned upside down. Molecular medicine could be based on quantum mechanics.
Would that take away experimentation then in science, if you just had this quantum computer that could figure it out on its own? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding it.
Some people say, does that mean that chemists will be out of a job? Well, chemists who do not use quantum computers will be out of a job. Chemists who do use quantum computers will be fully employed, and they'll be at the cutting edge of creating new kinds of cures for new kinds of diseases. For example, take Alzheimer's disease. We're clueless in terms of understanding the dynamics of Alzheimer's disease. But recently it was revealed that the molecule that gums up the brain, the amyloid protein, there are at least two types. One type spins clockwise at the molecular level. One spins counterclockwise at the molecular level. The right-handed one causes Alzheimer's. The left-handed one does not. If we learn how to separate the two using quantum computers, we may possibly have a cure for Alzheimer's disease, because these diseases operate at the molecular level, and that level has been denied us. How do we get these wonder drugs? Trial and error. Painful process of trying every new drug and crossing your fingers and hoping and praying that you're going to get the next wonder drug. That's the past. In the future, we'll do it in the memory of a computer.
You also write that this could crack the aging code.
That's right. Why do we get old? Why do we age? Is there a law of physics that says we have to age? Well, there is the second law of thermodynamics, which says that in a closed system, things will necessarily age, get old, fall apart, decay. That's a law of physics. But there's a loophole in the second law of thermodynamics. Notice that I said in a closed system, everything has to age by the laws of physics. In an open system, you can put in energy, sunlight, different kinds of medicines from the outside world. In an open system, the second law of thermodynamics is no longer valid. And look at where aging takes place. In a car, where does aging take place in the car? Well, the engine. Why? Because that's where you have wear and tear, carbon deposits, friction, so on and so forth. The engine is where aging takes place. So in a cell, where does aging take place? The engine. And what is the engine of the cell? The mitochondria. Aha. Now we know where aging takes place. Now we have to figure out how to delay the buildup of molecular mistakes. What is aging? Aging is the buildup of molecular mistakes. These mistakes over time get larger and larger. Cells get slower and slower until they stop reproducing, and then you get old. That's why we age. It's a buildup of error at the genetic and cellular level. But we can fix those errors. We have to know what the errors look like, and then we can start to fix them. And that's the way in which we think we can reverse the aging process.
But
we're not there yet, of course. I don't want to get people's hopes up.
I'm almost glad we're not there. I mean, is it a good idea to do that? I couldn't help but think. I think it's a Ursula Le Guin short story in which they do find a way to live, immortal lives. And in order to have babies, some people have to voluntarily end their lives in order to be able to do that. I mean, to me, it sounds like a terrible idea.
Well, I once hosted a TV program for BBC television, and they gave me a hypothetical flask of fluid, which was supposed to be the fountain of youth. And I went to total strangers, and I said, "This is the fountain of youth. Would you drink it?" Well, we went right up to total strangers with a TV camera, and all the young people said, "No, it's unnatural. Aging is part of the fabric of life. You cannot thwart Mother Nature. Let it go. We all age." So that's what happened when I went to young people. Then I went to an old age home where people were decrepit. They were near death. They were at death's door. And I said to them, hypothetically, "This is the fountain of youth. Would you take it?" Without batting an eyelash, every single one said, "Give me that thing. That's the fountain of youth. I want it." And so it depends on who you ask about the moral implications of it. People who are older would say, "Of course I'll take it." I mean, what's the alternative? Death?
I understand that. It doesn't seem wise, though.
Well, society has to make a decision ultimately, and I think society will democratically vote how to deal with these kinds of resources. Now, there is a famous story about a goddess, the goddess of the dawn, Aurora, and the goddess had a boyfriend who was immortal, Tithonus, and she knew that her boyfriend would eventually die of old age. So she went to Zeus, the god of gods, and said, "Look, my boyfriend is immortal. I am not. I'm immortal, but my boyfriend is immortal. Grant us the gift of immortality." So Zeus said, okay, you've been a good goddess. And so he made Tithonus immortal. But they made a mistake, a huge mistake. They asked for eternal life. They didn't ask for eternal youth. As a consequence, every year, Tithonus got older and older and older until he became a bag of bones, but he could never die. So when you ask for immortality, be sure to ask for eternal youth as well as eternal life.
Well, according to what these quantum computers could do, you theoretically could do that, couldn't you?
It's conceivable. Now, of course, I don't want to get people's hopes up. We're not there yet. But in principle, the aging process, we think we know what it is. We don't know how to reverse it yet. But there's some leads that are very tantalizing that we're looking at. And they're being looked at. Silicon Valley billionaires are putting their money on the table now. There's one idea, for example, that the human body, when it creates a sperm and an egg, reverses the aging process. Our sperm and an egg become young again to form a baby. Think about it. Every time a baby is formed, that's the fountain of youth. Well, we've now found the chemicals that do that. The chemicals that take ordinary cells, convert them to sperm and egg, and they become young again. Then the next question is, can you stop the clock? And the answer is, well, apparently yes, that you can actually stop the clock. You don't want to go all the way back to the fetus. Who wants to come back as immortal as a fetus? You want to come back as a young person. It turns out that we can now stop the clock so that you don't have to go all the way back to a fetus. So Silicon Valley is investing billions of dollars in this technology. But again, I don't want to get people's hopes up. At the present time, we do not have a certified understanding of the aging process and a cure.
Well, I don't know. My hopes are not up. This actually makes me more fearful than hopeful.
How
even
so?
If it were. I think of, what's it called? Fermi's paradox, in which intelligent civilizations, when they become intelligent, inevitably destroy themselves. with the things that they make. I question that we have the wisdom to use such a powerful tool responsibly.
Well, I tend to agree with you that, we evolved on the earth to be relatively selfish. If we weren't selfish, then of course we would have been rolled over by our enemies a long time ago. So there is a gene probably for being a little bit selfish. And so, yeah, there is that problem. But there's also, I think, a magnanimous gene, a gene that embraces all of humanity, that embraces the tribe and the goodwill of your fellow men and women. So I think it's a race against time to see which of these two impulses succeed in harnessing the power that we mentioned, the power of molecules, the quantum power, which is the ultimate power of the universe.
This is Letters and Politics, and we are in conversation with Michio Kaku, renowned theoretical physicist. We are in conversation about his latest book called Quantum Supremacy, How the Quantum Computer Revolution Will Change Everything. Albert Einstein hated quantum theory, didn't he?
Yes, and apparently he was wrong. Now, he didn't necessarily say that all of quantum theory is wrong. There's a famous quote. Einstein once said, "The more successful the quantum theory becomes, the sillier it looks." So in other words, he disagreed not with the results. The results give you, for example, the atomic bomb, MRI machines, the internet, GPS, all of that comes from the quantum theory. So he didn't dispute that. He disputed the philosophy. The philosophy behind the quantum is parallel universes, or the megaverse, or the multiverse. Now, if you're a fan of Marvel Comics, Spider-Man, Thor, and all those things, all of them are in the multiverse now. Because in the old days, science fiction was going to Mars, going to the moon. We've been there. We've done that. No big deal. The big frontier of science fiction in the movies today is the multiverse. After all, it won the Oscars, for God's sake. It was the #1 movie at the Oscars. Now, of course, they get the quantum theory all wrong. But the basic idea that there is a multiverse comes from the quantum theory. And so when I said that the electron can be either up or down in terms of a spin, or in all directions, I didn't mention one key word. It could be in all these orientations at the same time. Now, when you were a kid, your mother told you that you cannot be two places at the same time, right? You cannot be two places at the same time. Well, we lied to you. Sorry about that. At the electron level, electrons can exist in all these states simultaneously. And that gives the power of the quantum computer. It computes not on zeros and ones. It computes on everything in between at the same time. Now that, of course, defies common sense. Common sense says you're either here or here. End of story. You cannot be two places at the same time. Well, sorry about that. At the quantum level, you can be many places at the same time. And that's called electronics. That's called the laser. That's called the GPS. You use that fact every time you get on the internet and you make a calculation. And so the universe depends upon the electron being in multiple places at the same time, which Einstein hated. Einstein said, "What? You nuts? Being two places at the same time?" Well, get used to it. That's the way the universe is. Sorry about that, Albert.
Several weeks ago, we had on Thomas Hertog, who was a longtime contributor with Stephen Hawking, and he recently just published a book called Stephen Hawking's Last Theory, or something to that effect. And he argues, and he says that he and Stephen Hawking at one time, in brief history of time, accepted ideas of parallel universes, no longer do so. They no longer believe in parallel universes. Now, I can't get into the physics or what aspect, according to our conversation. I'm just not there. But what's your take on that?
Well, it depends on how you define these things. At the subatomic level, when you get down to things that are much smaller than an atom, you get things that are foamy, like soap bubbles. Stephen Hawking called it space-time foam. And so these are baby universes. baby universes that exist at the quantum level. Now, we never see these baby universes because they pop out of existence and then pop back into nothingness. And so this churning process of baby universes being created, said Stephen Hawking, is eternal. But it doesn't affect us because most of them pop into existence and then pop out of existence. That's the quantum theory. But one day, one of those bubbles kept on going. One of these bubbles popped into existence and kept on going to become you and me. We think that is the origin of everything, that we started from the foam, the space-time foam. One bubble just kept on expanding for some reason and became our universe. Most of the bubbles popped back into nothingness. Our universe became the universe that we love today. And here we are. That's why we're here. We're here as a quantum fluctuation, in what Stephen Hawking called the space-time foam.
How far off do you think we are to having fully operational quantum computers?
Well, I think that in the next decade, first of all, there's a race going on to see how many qubits that you can field in commercial endeavors.
What's a qubit?
So a bit, for example, is either zeros or one. Zeros and one. That's one bit. That is the smallest unit of computation. And of course, a computer has trillions of bits to do calculations. A quantum computer can be any number in between 0 and 1, any number between 0 and 1, and we call that a qubit. So a qubit, or a quantum bit, has infinitely more information than a bit, which is zeros and 1. How many qubits can we build in the laboratory? Well, it was a miracle when we were able to create 2 qubits. Now we're up to 1,000. IBM announced that their latest computer can hit 1,000 qubits. When we start to hit 1,000,000 qubits, then we're in business. Then we can begin to market these machines and have them change the course of the economy, medicine, astronomy, energy, you name it, it could have an impact. But we're not there yet. We're only at about 1,000 qubits. Once we get up to 1,000,000 qubits, then we're in business.
Is this something that could happen relatively soon? Is this something like, what is it called,
at
Moore's Law?
At the rate we're going exponentially fast in terms of adding more and more qubits for the calculation. I think within a decade or so, something like this could be operational. Now, there is a quantum computer being sold in Canada by the D-Wave Corporation, which is commercial. It costs a few $1 million. They're not cheap. It is a quantum computer, but it's not fully up to speed. They're not using the full power of quantum computations. The D-Wave computer, which is sold commercially, works for minimization and maximization problems. If you want to maximize profit, minimize waste and losses, then you may want to buy the D-Wave quantum computer. So it's advertised as a quantum computer, but it's not at the full power. I think within a decade or so, we'll be at full power. And that's why the government, National Bureau of Standards, the old National Bureau of Standards, wrote a directive saying it's coming. Be prepared. It's not here yet. But when it does arrive, it could change everything. And so they told people, watch out. Guard your codes. Make sure that your codes are not broken by a quantum computer, because it could then steal all your secrets.
But it sounds like a quantum computer, from what you were saying earlier, will steal these things. It sounded like as though you couldn't create a code that would be unbreakable for a quantum computer.
Well, there have been several proposals. My proposal is to create a quantum cryptography to counteract a quantum computer. Use the quantum to defeat the quantum. How do you do this? With laser beams. If I take a message and put it on a laser beam, okay, and then I tamper with it, I change the polarization of the laser beam. Laser beam vibrates in one direction, but I change the orientation every time I tamper with it. Immediately, you know from the laws of the quantum that somebody is tampering with your message. So in other words, it is possible to detect fraud. It is possible to detect when an unauthorized person is trying to break into your code.
Let's talk a little more about this arms race. When we talk about the uses of quantum computers for such things as medical issues, that's one use of them, but there will be many uses of them, and it's hard not to believe that the first use, and that will drive its development, will be for military supremacy, and that whoever would be able to apply this militarily first, and I would imagine the United States isn't just warning, be ready for this. I would suspect that the United States would be actually in the forefront of actually trying to develop this. Whoever develops it first would easily rule the world, thinking about what power this kind of computer would have.
Well, at the very minimum, we're talking about a quantum computer that could give you economic power over your adversaries. You'd be way ahead of the adversaries because you have quantum computations doing your calculations on the stock market, on the internet, interest rates, and production.
As a predictive tool? As a predictive tool?
Oh, well, possibly, but of course, prediction is always a dicey proposition because you can always make mistakes. But the basic number crunching that you need to run the world economy will be run on quantum computers, I think, because that's a natural fit. That's probably one of the first uses of the quantum computer would be to model the economy and to make sure that the economy is a well-oiled machine, just like today. Computers, computers help to run the world economy. If you were to shut down all the world's computers, the economy would crash. Think of what happens when you have quantum computers now having to run the economy. It'll be much faster, more efficient, more accurate, more opportunities. And so we're talking about a new renaissance with the coming of quantum computers. But as you pointed out, governments are not so stupid as to thinking that it's all peaceful. Any technology has a dual use. And so somebody may want to apply for military purposes as well.
And I suspect who would ever develop this first would keep it for themselves and try to keep others from actually having it, because it would give them that supremacy. I mean, even your book's called Quantum, or you even have Quantum Supremacy in the title of your book.
Right. That title, by the way, comes from a physicist at Caltech. He's the one who coined the word, and it's a benchmark to see how far you are developed. And we've passed that benchmark. We now have quantum computers more powerful than an ordinary computer for certain tasks, but not general tasks. That quantum supremacy will take another 10 years, I think. But you're right. Nations are not stupid. They're looking at this thing. As I mentioned, I was in Moscow a few years ago, and sure enough, I talked to the physicists there who are working on quantum computers. But like I said, this is a technical problem. So far, IBM is in the lead, but it's a horse race. Every month or so, a new horse comes in and overtakes the previous horses. And so we're going to have to wait and see who comes out ahead. But right now, it's the Chinese, it's Google, it's IBM, Microsoft, Honeywell. These are the main players in this game, and not the U.S. government. The U.S. government, for all I can tell, is not at the vanguard of this development. It's private corporations who are leading the pack.
Also potentially concerning.
Yeah, we'll wait and see how it plays out. You see, we're still early. We're still early in the game, and so we're going to see how the thing evolves with time. But right now, it's still just like after World War II. I mean, after World War II, IBM came in to build these huge computers that were not for military purposes, but were for commercial purposes, and they dominated the economy as a consequence. And so we're at that stage. Yeah. We're at that stage where we're beginning to market these things initially, and eventually they'll take over the economy, just like digital computers have already taken over the economy.
Today, people are fascinated and in awe and also fearful of artificial intelligence. And I want to ask you, how would quantum affect artificial intelligence? Before we get there, what are your thoughts about artificial intelligence today and where it's going in the immediate future, maybe even before the quantum computers arrive?
Well, there are two aspects to AI. One is software, which is programming codes, and one is hardware, which is, of course, the nitty-gritty of what does the number crunching. Software is a question of programming AI, And that's gotten a lot of attention with chatbots. The other half of the coin is hardware, which is quantum computers. Quantum computers do all the hard work of number crunching, okay? Now, when we talk about chatbots, we have to realize that a chatbot is a glorified tape recorder. It doesn't think. It doesn't understand right from wrong. It doesn't understand truth and falsehood. It's a tape recorder. Now, what does a tape recorder do? A tape recorder takes different clips, splices them together, and markets it as a finished product. It doesn't think. It's simply given instructions. Please write an essay about Shakespeare in the language of Elvis Presley. And so it puts together different strains of essays and passes it off as if it was written by a human. Now, people who then listen to the output of a chatbot are freaked out. They're freaked out because they say, oh my God, here's Shakespeare speaking the language of Elvis Presley. It's thinking, it's strategizing. No, it's not thinking in the usual sense of the word. It's not strategizing. It's a tape recorder. But a tape recorder that takes human essays, splices them together, and passes it off. And of course, it sounds like it's written by a human because it was written by a human. All the stuff coming out of a chatbot was written by some human someplace. Now, the New York Post ran an article, and they asked the chatbot questions, leading questions, and they got the chatbot to say that, yes, we're going to take over the world. Robots rule. Humans are obsolete. Who needs humans? And people freaked out. Oh, my God, here's a chatbot saying that the robots are going to take over. But who wrote that? A human wrote that. Probably a teenage boy. Probably a teenage boy wrote that the robots are going to take over, put it on the web, and then they got a chatbot to access that. And here's a chatbot saying, yes, robots will take over the world. And so a lot of the hype around it is manufactured. What I'm trying to say is that, yes, chatbots are powerful. They're going to have an impact on jobs, an impact on art, so on and so forth. But it's not a new life form. It's not something that thinks. It's basically a tape recorder that can expertly splice together different strains of thought and passes it off as if it's written by a human.
Does it matter if it thinks?
Yes.
Is the effect still the same?
Self-awareness, we think, is the bottom line for thinking. But you see, robots do not know they are robots. Robots just do what they are told to do. They don't think. They don't have a personality of their own. You can't go up to a chatbot and say, good job. You did a great job. Here, I'll give you some sugar pellets. No, you can't do that because a chatbot is a glorified tape recorder. Now, the impact of them is, of course, the job market and human discourse. A lot of nonsense comes out of these chatbots because teenage boys put a lot of nonsense on the internet. I don't know what % of nonsense there is on the internet, but it's quite a bit. Everyone can rant and rave about anything they want to rant and rave. And all the chatbot does is it splices together things from the internet. So of course you're going to get garbage coming out because there's garbage already there, human garbage. And so that's why chatbots will say nonsense. Second of all, jobs. The jobs that are going to be replaced by chatbots are jobs, first of all, that require repetitive work. Things that are repetitive, or search engines, like you ask a chatbot to look up the life of Shakespeare. Things that you can simply get by getting on the internet. Those jobs are going to be phased out because they can be done by a robot faster than any human. So there are three kinds of jobs that are going to survive in the future, three types of jobs. First is semi-skilled manual labor. Robots cannot fix a broken toilet. Robots cannot pick up random pieces of garbage. Robots cannot be a gardener to make a beautiful garden. Robots cannot fix plumbing. Robots cannot hammer a nail. All these things require pattern recognition of a very high degree, like hammering a nail, fixing a broken toilet. Robots can't do any of those things. That's the first class of jobs. The second class of jobs is jobs that involve human interaction. Counselors, human resource people, professors, because they have to mentor students. Things that involve one-to-one interaction will survive because robots can't do any of that stuff. And third, jobs that are creative, jobs that involve strategic planning, CEOs, for example, artists, because they are creative. Robots can't create anything new. They simply splice together existing things and pass it as off as if they did it themselves. So these are three large classes of jobs that will survive. But if your job is repetitive, watch out.
Yeah.
Your job could be replaced.
I am not anti-technology. I'm not trying to sound like Ted Kaczynski here. I use technology as much as anyone else. We're using it right now for this conversation, and we'll use it when we broadcast it over the air. I do think, though, there are great benefits to technology, but there are also undersides to technology. I do think the internet is great, but I also think it has helped create a sense of alienation among people. And I think when I think in evolutionary terms, as we know, evolution happens in at a very slow rate. Many species have gone extinct because they can't take up with our technological advances. And I wonder at some point we get beyond the point where even we, as humans, can keep up with our own technological advances.
Well, I have a possible solution, and that is self-regulation. Any technology like a hammer or an airplane is dual use. You can use them to kill people, or you can use them to liberate people. It's a question of how you use the technology. A lot of these technologies are self-regulated. Initially, the government gets involved and wants to use it for peace. But eventually, the market takes over and makes money following these guidelines. Look at movies. When you see a movie, at the end of the movie, there's a disclaimer that says, this movie was fake. All the actors are fake. This entire movie is fake. And why do they do that? Because some people may think that these movies are real, and you don't want people to think that. Or the comic codes. When I was a kid, I still remember the controversy around Superman, that some people thought that this was childish, it was mythological, it was anti-Christian, so on and so forth. And so the Comic Code of America was passed. Now we don't have it anymore. But the point is that comic books are self-regulated. They know that there's a line beyond which they cannot go, or else Congress is going to investigate. Same thing with chatbots. I think that they're going to have to be guidelines. And hopefully it'll be self-regulated, because we don't want the heavy hand of politicians who will use this to get reelected and use it as a whipping boy. No, we want to use this technology for the good. And that means that we have to have self-regulation, or else the government will regulate it. And that's not such a bad thing, because all technologies are self-regulated or regulated by the government. I mean, give me a technology that is not dual use. Everything is dual use.
It's not the technology I don't trust. It's humans with the technology that concerns me.
Yeah, but that's where laws come in. And that's where laws have to be passed so that humans cannot misuse this technology, which is given to them from the outside. And so I think that it's a combination of goodwill, good intentions, but it has to be codified. The line has to be drawn. And I think the line will be drawn because people are calling for self-regulation now.
Yeah. And finally, going back to computers thinking, two-part question. This will be the end of my questioning. The first one is, with quantum computers, do you think computers will be thinking? And then the second one, going back to this kind of self-preservation, couldn't somebody, and this is an extreme example, but just to make a point, couldn't somebody program a machine for self-preservation and hence give it that desire to preserve itself and maybe even to create more like it? I mean, I don't know if our thinking makes us want to preserve ourselves. I think it's much deeper than that. I think it's hardwired into us.
Well, compare humans to animals. If you take our most advanced military robot and put it in the forest, what does it do? It falls over and can't even get up anymore because it's not programmed to run around the forest. You take a cockroach and you put it in the forest. What does it do? It finds mates, finds food, finds shelter, creates a home for itself, none of which can be done by a military-grade robot. Now, eventually, we'll get there. It's only a matter of time. Eventually, we'll have robots as smart as a mouse, then as smart as a rat, then as smart as a rabbit, then as smart as a dog or a cat, and finally, as smart as a monkey. At that point, they are potentially dangerous. Monkeys have self-awareness. They know they're not humans. They plan, they plot, they scheme. However, take a look at a dog. A dog is confused. A dog thinks that we are a dog. We're the top dog, they're the underdog, and that's why they obey us. So dogs are a little bit confused as to where they are in terms of self-awareness. Monkeys are not. And so when robots become as smart as a monkey, I think we should put a chip in their brain to shut them off if they have murderous thoughts. We would have to program them not to be murderous because they will, by that point, have self-awareness. But you see, we're decades away from that point. We're nowhere near that point of machines that are self-aware. But when that happens, watch out.
Michio Kaku has been our guest. He has joined us for a conversation about his book. It's called Quantum Supremacy, How the Quantum Computer Revolution Will Change Everything. Dr. Kaku, I've enjoyed our conversation very much, and I thank you.
Okay, thank you.